Chapter 18. The Antagonism of the Christ Principle and Disease, or the Healing Power of Jesus. By the Christ Principle, or that by which Jesus became the Christ, I mean a spiritual intelligence. It is not science or knowledge on the plane of sense. It is not a knowledge imparted by instruction from without and imported into the mind, but arises from within, the God-light in the soul, the living Word. Nor is it knowledge alone, a coldly luminous intellectual state, like moonbeams reflected from the snow fields on a winter's night, but it is an interior light that has in it the warmth of a divine love. That Jesus, after the age of 30 years, exhibited a marvelous power of healing the sick without medicine, in which so far surpassed the power of his contemporaries as to be deemed miraculous, is a well-established fact, and as well certified as the principal facts in the life of Alexander or Caesar. It is not improbable in itself, and many marvelous cures have been effected in every subsequent age, and even in the century in which we live, that render it entirely credible. On this subject I cannot do better than to use the language of Dr. Hayes, with some additions of my own. These so-called miracles cannot contradict the laws of the world, which are the constant expression of the divine will and the established divine order. Therefore, amid all apparent contradictions, we must seek for an accordance with law. According to the gospel narratives, his acts of healing were not always unconnected with bodily contact, the imposition of the hands or other outward means. In this way, they may have some relation to rabbinical or Essene methods of cure, and in some measure communicable by instruction. This is rendered probable by its continuance in the Apostolic Church. It has been supposed by some that Jesus spent his early life among the Essenes, who were called in Egypt therapeuti, or healers. This may or may not be true. We have no historic evidence of it, and it is, in itself, a matter of little importance. But whatever means he used, the power of the Word and the Spirit was always predominant. He demanded as an indispensable condition a trustful submission, or an act of faith. From the lack of a state of receptivity, as a consequence of the absence of this needful mental state, his power of healing was not always exercised, nor did all the sick who sought a cure find it. On one occasion, he healed only one out of a multitude of sick people. Perhaps all cures, by every method, are confined to the region where the power of the will and of faith over the body exists. These cures, therefore, are not without analogies in all ages and countries, and may hence be reduced to the action of some spiritual law. A resemblance is afforded us in the cures effected by animal magnetism, but only so far as it contains a mysterious power over disease, arising out of the great life of nature, and perhaps, moreover, the means which Jesus used may have stood in some relation to magnetic or psychological phenomena. But the marvelous power of Jesus appears far more like an intelligent mastery of nature by the soul. The mind of man, originally endowed with dominion over the earth, recovered its old rights by the holy innocence of Jesus, conquering the unnatural power of disease and death. Here, therefore, there was no violation of the laws of nature, but, on the contrary, the disturbed order of the world here recovered its original harmony and truth. Even the wonderful power exercised over external nature may be reduced under the same law, and may be understood according to an accelerated process of nature. Jesus lived in harmony with the perfect order of nature, that is, the will of God, which is expressed in nature, was the supreme law. What a person who thus comes into the true order of his life can do, the history of the world furnishes us but an imperfect means of knowing, from the paucity of examples of that state. A knowledge of nature's laws, and a life in harmony with the will of God, as expressed in what we call nature, invests the soul of man with a fraction of God's omnipotence. God is immanent in all natural law. To be perfectly natural is to attain to the blessedness and power of a life in God. When a divinely illuminated intellect is wedded to an exalted state of the religious affections, such a man will be a divine power in the world, a divine fact in human history. But his activity will assume a beneficent direction, and probably in the cure of disease, in the removal of the mental unhappiness that underlies it, as naturally and spontaneously as the needle points to the pole. There is a natural antagonism between the Christ principle and disease, a spontaneous resistance to the abnormal spiritual state which is the root of every morbid condition of the body. The human body does not contain room enough for both to occupy it in harmony. The Christ principle, as the most potent and positive force, will bind the strong man and cast him out. As soon as a man comes into possession of it, he is at once turned into a good Samaritan and goes forth to heal the wounds and hurts of humanity by wine and oil, the symbolic representatives of good and truth. There are many things done today from an advanced knowledge of nature's laws, and her hidden forces that would have been deemed 18 centuries ago as the greatest of miracles. But as common events and everyday occurrences, they have lost the element of wonder and are, consequently, no longer miraculous. They are not surprises, as the word miracle means, but ordinary things like the germination of grain, the rising and setting of the sun, and the still mysterious ebb and flow of the tides. The cures wrought by Jesus the Christ are as much in harmony with nature, when properly understood, as the operation of the electric telegraph and the telephone, or the taking of photographs. The law by which they were effected is not an incommunicable divine secret and impenetrable mystery, but will someday be as well understood as any of the processes of nature, and better than the action of medicines and the cure of disease. Then will be fulfilled the words of the Christ, "The works that I do shall ye do also, and greater works than these shall ye do, because I go to my Father." As spiritual knowledge increases, and divine light penetrates the solid darkness of the world, the boundaries of the seemingly impossible will become an increasingly narrow area. When the hitherto mysterious relations of God and man, spirit and matter, and soul and body are better understood, what are called miraculous cures will be the everyday occurrences in the life of the true physician. The supernatural will disappear from science and history, and miracles will cease to be miraculous. The phenomena of the electric telegraph 1800 years ago would have been more wonderful than anything accredited to Jesus in the gospel narratives. The grand secret of all his cures is found in an intuitive knowledge of the relation of mind and body, of spirit and matter, and the absolute dominion of the one over the other. There has always been a yearning in the human soul to penetrate the darkness on this subject, and to lift the veil from its mystery. It shows itself in the history of magic, which is almost coeval with the authentic annals of the race. But the fullness of time, the divine, all-spacious moment, for the revelation of the great secret had not come. There is in men's minds a deep, prophetic intimation that the dayspring from on high is about to visit us, to give light to them that sit in darkness and in the region and shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Then sickness, disease, and death, with the quantum of suffering that attends them, at which the benevolent heart stands appalled, will not be viewed as the infliction of a relentless fate, for which there is no remedy but passive submission. Science, with its higher knowledge of the mental causes of disease and of the efficacy of unfailing spiritual remedies, will no longer stand in powerless and dumb amazement before it, but will become the power of God and the wisdom of God unto salvation. Of the 33 so-called miracles of the Christ, recorded in the Gospels, 24 were the cure of the sick. So far as Jesus was a representative of God and a manifestation in the flesh of the divine being, this shows that God is more interested in healing the sick than in anything else. It is the favorite work of the divine love, the recreation of the infinite goodness, the pastime of the infinite spirit presence in life. But the healing of the sick by Jesus was no violation of the laws of nature. As one has said, the miracle is thus not unnatural, nor can it be, since the unnatural, the contrary to order, is of itself the ungodly, and can in no way, therefore, be affirmed of a divine work, such as those with which we have to do. The very idea of the world, as more than one name which it bears testifies, is that of an order, that which comes, and then to enable it to realize this idea which it has lost will scarcely itself be a disorder. So far from this, the true miracle is a higher and purer nature, coming down out of the world of untroubled harmonies into this world of ours, which so many discords have jarred and disturbed, and bringing this back again, though it be but for one prophetic moment, into harmony with the higher. The healing of the sick can in no way be termed against nature, seeing that the sickness which was healed was against the true nature of man, that it is sickness which is abnormal and not health. The healing is the restoration of the primitive order. God has managed, and perpetually manages, to insert into our nature a tendency toward health, and against the unnatural condition which we call disease. When our flesh receives a wound, a strange nursing and healing process is immediately commenced to repair the injury. So in all diseases, organic or functional, this mysterious healing power, the vis mediatrix natures of the older physiologists, sets itself to work at once to triumph over the morbid condition. The results of its action bear all the marks of the highest intelligence, and thus exclude the idea of all chance. According to I.H. Fichte, these results are affected by an unconscious, or rather preconscious, action of the mind, which is the only living force of the body. But the only question with which we wish to deal at present is, cannot this healing process be greatly accelerated by a voluntary and conscious action of the mind, assisted, if need be, by some other person? I unhesitatingly affirm, from experience and observation, that it can, by some volitional, mental effort and process of thought, call it, if you fancy, imagination, or faith, or all combined into an unnamed power, this sanative conatus, or healing power which God has given to our physiological organism, may be greatly quickened and intensified in its action upon the body. Here is the secret philosophy of the cures effected by Jesus the Christ. Understanding the law and the mental process by which they were accomplished, they may be repeated upon ourselves or others under like conditions. In reference to one of the most seemingly impossible of the cures effected by Jesus, the case of the leper of Capernaum, Furness very justly remarks that it ought not to be hard to account for the cure, and to conceive how a mental and moral influence could have wrought to overcome the disease if we hold to the philosophy of many of the wisest of men, which teaches that the mind, instead of being an accident of the body, is its creating, organizing life. Thus is the law that is illustrated by all the so-called miracles of the Christ, so far as they relate to the healing of the sick, and all the others, if they are not mythical, are of minor importance. There is a law of the action of the mind on the body that is no more an impenetrable mystery than the law of gravitation. It can be understood and acted upon in the cure of disease as well as any other law of nature. Your knowledge, and especially spiritual intelligence, is power, and, in the eyes of the multitude, the results of its operation in the healing power of Jesus were deemed a miraculous potentiality. As a law of nature expresses the uniform mode in which the divine force manifests itself, a conformity to law is to us the only source of power. It is thus alone that what can make the divine power available for the cure of disease. Every method of cure, in order to its success, must conform its therapeutic devices to the divine operation in nature, and these can only accelerate and intensify the natural process of healing. He who best understands how to do this will be the physician whose cures will be the most frequent, and, to the world at large, the most marvelous.